Genocide is more than a crime against a particular group of people. It undermines the very essence of human existence, inflicting an irreversible blow to the spiritual heritage of all mankind.
I am addressing the people of Ukraine. Crimea is not a disputed territory. We do not want Ukraine to be divided, we do not need it. Russia has long recognized the borders of today's Ukraine. Our plans do not include the occupation of Ukrainian territories. We are not going to impose anything or anyone by force. I made a decision to conduct a special military operation. And we are aimed to demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine to achieve this goal.
Adolf Hitler hoped for a blitzkrieg and planned to arrange victory parades on all the main squares of the USSR cities on November 7, 1941. In Kiev, it was to be Хрещатик.
Война началась на рассвете, чтоб больше народу убить. Спали родители, спали их дети, когда стали Киев бомбить.
81 years later, Putin, the second Führer, was also hoping for a blitzkrieg, and he also planned to have a parade on Хрещатик, but on May 9th.
This war will last, Volodya, 3-4 days at most.
In a hot war, we will defeat Ukraine in 2 days. There is nothing to defeat, for God's sake, it's Ukraine.
Imitating Hitler, Putin attacked Kiev at 4 in the morning. And just like Hitler, he delivered his speech at 5:40 a.m.
I will not wage war against women and children. I have ordered my Air Force to limit itself to military targets.
The Russian military is making every effort to preserve the lives and safety of civilians. The strikes are carried out only on military targets.
The first hours of the war made it clear that the Russians, zombified and pumped up with propaganda, were here to kill.
Yes, I want a war with Ukraine. Yeah, I want the security service of Ukraine to be blown up. Yes, I want our security officers to kill absolutely everyone.
On February 27, 2022, Ukraine filed a lawsuit against Russia and the International Court of Justice in The Hague over military aggression and genocide against the Ukrainian people. All EU members except Hungary and a member of other countries have aligned themselves with this lawsuit.
The main characteristic of the crime of genocide is a special intent to exterminate in whole or in part one of the 4 protected groups of people: national, ethnic, racial, religious. That is, in other words, we need to get into the head of the criminal and find out whether he is killing people, civilians, because he wants to do it, because it is his intention, or there is a bigger intention in his mind and in the minds of his leadership, namely the extermination of Ukrainians as a national group.
For both Hitler and Putin, Ukraine turned out to be a hard nut to crack, and both, out of helplessness and horror over their defeat, tried to turn it into scorched earth.
When people fear and hate you, at the same time they want to inflict maximum harm onto you. And this is how genocide occurs. And in addition to being afraid of you and hating you, they also believe that they will get away with it.
Genocide differs from terror and repression in that it is committed not only by the punitive authorities and armed forces, but also by the people of the entire country. The war will start now. Now we're going to Kiev.
Russia, 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 Russia.
The Führer issues orders and ordinary people carry them out. The Russians could clearly see the huge sign "Children" on the square near the Mariupol Drama Theater and still bombed it.
Russia, Russia, Russia.
More than 600 people were killed by this airstrike. Among them were children who were hiding in basements.
I saw on TV how mercifully our soldiers treated Ukrainians.
They are not killing civilians, they are saving them.
Genocide never occurs out of the blue by itself. Never. Genocide, the idea of genocide, is created, is an artificial product. The point is that it is not inherent in humans to kill their own kind. In order for the idea of genocide to enter the minds of society, one must be preparing for it for years and build a platform. This is what both Hitler and Putin had done.
We must not let the said Führer come to power. Therefore, let's deal with some subtleties. The most important precursor to genocide is hard times. You feel depressed, hopeless, and you see enemies everywhere.
Cases of direct aggression against Russian citizens abroad have become more frequent. A child was expelled from school for wearing a jacket with the label Russia.
Don't feel me.
Russians nurture a sense of injustice about what is happening to my people, my religion, and my country.
I can't stand these traitors, Bandera and all that.
The image of an enemy is created so the soldiers at the front do not feel despair, shame and stress. The enemy who interferes with your good life, the enemy who threatens your life. That is, if you do not kill these women, if you do not kill their children, they will attack you tomorrow.
Another important constituent of genocide is approval. The perpetrators of crimes need their actions to be authorized, approved by society.
The Nazis attacked, so we must defend ourselves for the sake of our children's future.
The Nazis also tacitly supported their Führer and were witnesses and accomplices to his anti-human actions and policies.
Russia rules the world!
There's a lot of buzz now about our strikes on the energy infrastructure of the neighboring country. Yes, we're doing this.
Fatigue. The Führer who tortures like a sadist will exhaust his victims. Almost all missile attacks on Ukraine take place at night as a form of Putin's psychological pressure.
These things work on a psychological level. This is a common element of psychological warfare. The main goal is to create internal tension in Ukrainian society, maybe even ramp up to some kind of rebellious mood.
Putin's main goal, just like Hitler's, is to destroy Ukraine. That's why they wage war against cities, villages, dams, people, dogs and toilets. What a maniac wants is the victim's submission. But when a victim resists, they are no longer a victim. They are an enemy.
The bedrock of all this horror is that they consider themselves the owners of this land. And they consider Ukrainians to be a part of themselves. Their history books say that ancient Rus was here, their homeland. And they are not interested in who lives here on this land. They consider it their homeland.
This is the second time that Russians have caused environmental disasters of this kind in Ukraine. In 1941, on Stalin's orders, the Soviet army destroyed Dnipro. And in 2023, Putin's army blew up the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station, depriving tens of thousands of people of their homes and property.
The Russian Federation has mined the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Do you think the Russians are not thinking about whether to blow it up or not? This is the largest nuclear power plant in the world. In my opinion, there is only one way to bring it to an end. Once there is a global system in the world that will respond to aggression very quickly and effectively. The UN will either change or fade into oblivion along with the League of Nations.
The occupation of Chechnya, Georgia and Crimea gave Russians a sense of all permissiveness and invincibility.
Putin is our president, Vladimir Vladimirovich, we are standing beside you.
They are positive that they will rape Ukraine just as easily. But the leadership of the Russian Federation does not realize that they have attacked not just Ukraine. They have attacked a country with a 1,000-year tradition of street democracy.
I urge you to immediately lay down your arms and go home.
Russian warship, go to hell. Putin proclaims the genocide of the Ukrainian people with a completely stone face. And with the same stone face, 80% of Russians say it should be so.
War is a victory. War is love. War is a friend. War is the future of the world. The educational sector of Russia and the mass media are organized in such a way that thinking does not take place. Mass consciousness consists of a combination of ideas, stereotypes, visual images, and sounds, stimuli that, just like at Hitler's mass events, trigger the state of the collective unconsciousness in people. They are just retelling what they saw on TV. This is how the propaganda machine works. It turns them into mentally disabled people.
Hitler gave Nazi Germany the gift of all permissiveness. Hitler and all those who supported him changed the system of values. The situation in Russia is the same.
Putin has promised to build a Nazi Germany, in this case a Nazi Russia, which will dominate, which will seize territories, whose foreign policy will be built on blackmail, murder, a monster country, and international law will bypass this country. He promised impunity for robberies, murders, and so on.
The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939. Germany and the USSR were supposed to divide Europe between them. Many people wonder where Putin got all this chauvinistic nonsense in his head.
Germany and Russia have a common history. It's time to remember this.
Let's ask the question in a different way. Is the Russian system a product of cooperation between the Nazis and the Soviets in the outbreak of World War II?
This construct of a great, victorious nation is completely deconstructed by the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. The victorious nation turns out to be the nation that started the war. That is why the Russians, Putin, and all the people who serve the Kremlin are not just covering up this. They simply can't see it. They ignore it.
Russians do not like to remember the year 1939. A joint parade in occupied Brest, the Red and Nazi armies together. And then a dramatic change of the course, mutual hatred. This is probably why Soviet soldiers took revenge on the Germans with such maniacal hatred in 1945 during the occupation of Berlin. The number of raped women is shocking. More than 2 million. This is the largest phenomena of mass rape in history.
Sexual violence during the war is an embodiment of archaic archetypes, because all primates did the same thing when taking territories from their rivals. They killed all the mammals, or they raped them in the same way, because men rape not only women. And in this war now, there are not only women raped, no matter what age. Russia is actually demonstrating that it is still a barbaric tribe in social terms.
On February 24, 2022, a new plague of the 21st century came to Ukraine. Or rather, it made a leap into the center of Ukraine. The world shuddered at the documented sadistic cruelty of the Russians.
Akbar!
Allahu Akbar!
Ahmad!
Power!
Cossacks!
Power! Russians hunted civilians, calling it a Ukrainian safari. Once small towns like Irpin, Bucha and Hostomel were associated with peace, fair forests and new residential complexes. But now they are associated with bodies of tortured and murdered people.
Чи мене це здивувало? Ні. Знаєте чому? Я з Донецької області, я знаю про те, що росіяни роблять подібні речі з 2014 року. Різниця тільки в тому, що Бучу і Ірпінь наші Збройні Сили України дуже швидко звільнили, і у них не було часу приховати свої злочини. Тобто це побачив весь світ. Росіяни серед 5 елементів геноциду як воєнного злочину скоїли всі 5.
This is 83-year-old Vera Pipa, who lives in Horenka, near Bucha. Her house was completely destroyed by Russian Grad rockets, and she only miraculously managed to hide in an old closet.
I think I'm fine, even if the beams collapse. The wardrobe was made in the 1930s. It survived that war and will survive this one. I locked myself in there, and so I prayed to myself, sat there and just prayed. I sat down like that, and then I found my blanket there. I laid down and stayed here.
Vera Pipa recalls that she hid in this closet during the Nazi occupation. She says that despite what the Nazis did, Russians in Bucha were real monsters.
If only God would give them such a moment to experience such grief. There are no words to describe what I saw, what I witnessed. I watched it go, watched it shot, watched these fires. It's just hatred. They have hated us all their lives.
The liberated city of Kupiansk is crying. It mourns the victims of German atrocities.
Never again, said the world after the Second World War. We can do it again, said the Russians. Present days, Kharkiv region. The bodies of tortured people are being taken out of the pits again. After 81 years, Nazism returned to Ukrainian lands. The Russians brought it on their bayonets.
This is a nation that envies everyone, is not compensated and has no historical perspective. And today there are also outcasts all over the world, and that's why all this is accumulating. And then Ukrainians appear and say we will not kneel down.
Hitler loved listening to Vagner. He was so inspiring.
How can you win a war if it turns out by chance? I'm just assuming that this old man is a snob.
Putin also loved Vagner, but not to listen, but to watch.
Russia is on the verge of disaster. If we don't adjust these screws today, the plane will fall apart in the air.
The chief conductor, Yevgeny Prigozhin, successfully performed those compositions that the Russian Führer loves. If he hadn't claimed the throne, he would have continued to control the pocket army. But
it exploded twice. Now it's falling, look, it's falling.
He went with Wagner to the Kobzon's concert.
What we are facing is treason. Excessive ambitions and personal interest led to betrayal.
Kadyrov's Tik Tok Army is another sadistic force, despised by real Chechens. The Tik Tok Army is an anti-retreat force that shoots deserters, kills the wounded, and intimidates those who are mobilized.
The marker this indicator is Kadyrov, who was in no hurry to suppress Prigozhin's rebellion, and the main forces are located in the Caucasus and in Moscow. That is, everyone is at a low start today and everyone is ready for the upcoming realignment of power, when different groups will use very specific weapons.
All these Putin's men resemble poisonous spiders in a jar, ready to sting both friends and enemies. They are already disappointed with Putin. Several significant defeats along the front line, the massive escape of a large number of military personnel with weapons into Russia, and as a result a huge number of riots in different regions. Putin failed to defeat Ukrainians on the battlefield, so he resorted to another genocidal crime: economic terror. Russians are taking out equipment and machines from the temporarily occupied territories and burning everything that they cannot steal. In addition, Führer Putin has been launching numerous missile attacks on Ukrainian enterprises, trying to finally finish off our economy.
A register of damage has already been created. It will deal with compensation and reparations from the Russian Federation, which will be used to compensate for the damage caused. Then a compensation commission will be created to decide how much should be compensated to whom, and the compensation fund, which in fact will be replenished from Russian assets.
Putin is not just copying Hitler in everything, he's maniacally doing what Adolf did. Now you can see how the Nazis are sending trainloads of wheat from Ukraine to Reich. And this is the temporarily occupied Kherson. Now Putinists are stealing Ukrainian wheat, causing the whole region to starve. They know how to starve entire regions and the whole country. In 1932 and 1933, they already did it.
Вони це вже робили.
Holodomor was precisely the tool that turned Ukrainians into Soviet citizens. At a terrible cost, the destruction of consciousness when people exchanged freedom and any visions of future freedom simply for a piece of bread. And now the same or similar practices are being used. Putin, who knows about Holodomor like a Chekist, he is trying to force Ukrainians into this Russian totalitarianism. He wants them to surrender, now under the threat of a terrible death from starvation, just as Ukrainians once did to agree to live in the Gulag.
Hitler attempted to finally resolve the Jewish question by creating hundreds of concentration camps, death factories, where inhuman experiments were carried out on prisoners. Now, you are watching the interrogation of a guard of the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, who personally executed more than 5,000 people.
The hydrocyanic acid was mixed with hot air and entered the gas chamber as a gas. Approximately in 10 seconds, people would fall down. They were wheezing and moaning so funny like this.
Today, Putin is attempting to finally resolve the Ukrainian question. Interestingly, there was a Z station in Sachsenhaus with a gas chamber and a special device for shooting in the bag. Nowadays, this sign covers Russian equipment, and Putin's soldiers are torturing Ukrainians even more cruelly than the Nazis. The footage of the shooting of an unarmed Ukrainian soldier, Alexander Matsievsky, shocked the whole world. He was killed for just one phrase.
Glory to Ukraine.
They used to win all the time, but today they are losing, and they subconsciously understand that losing to Ukraine will put an end to who is in charge in the history of Kievan Rus. And who is in charge of this territory, and this is a humiliation of the core emotions of Russians.
After shocking comparison is that the Nazis turned prisoners of war, concentration camp inmates, especially children, into blood donors for Wehrmacht soldiers.
Do you know who I am?
Vivi!
Yes, that's me.
The Russians are doing the same sin, violating all the rules of warfare.
Ukrainian prisoners of war who are currently held captive by the Russian Federation are obliged to become blood donors for our military.
The largest recorded number of lost kilograms is 77. There was a guy I knew, by the way. I saw him a few months before the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation. We communicated with him. When we brought him back, I didn't even recognize him. I just asked him, how could he lose so many kilograms in 5 months of captivity? He said, well, what if every day they give you only water and some kind of stuff that looks like water? You're just being psychologically murdered. In addition to physical abuse, they use electric shock.
Just like the Nazis, today's Russians are disregarding all the rules of warfare. For example, you can see how the Russians are bombing Bakhmut and Mariupol with phosphorus shells.
Our territory that is subject to demining is twice as large as Austria's. That is, 2 territories of Austria, which is also not a small European state. I want to give you an example. Croatia. It is a small country, and whose territory there were hostilities that ended in 1993. As of now, the demining of Croatia's territory continues.
Це при тому,
This is despite the fact that Croatia is now on the first place in the world in terms of the quality of demining equipment.
техніки.
Putin is using the barbaric tactics of Hitler, who did not follow any rules of warfare. The Nazis used butterfly bombs on a massive scale, dropping them from airplanes over cities and villages.
Look what I found!
This is a fragment of a British educational film from 1941. The authors urge people not to get close to such dangerous objects.
A butterfly bomb explodes 30 minutes after being dropped or from the slightest touch. If you see such objects, immediately call the police.
Putin's troops are also planting petal mines in Ukraine, and they paint them in bright colors to attract the attention of children. In the first year of the war alone, Russia launched 5 Soviet missiles at Ukraine. Various toxic lead compounds are used to detonate them. Once in the body, these compounds affect the brain, kidneys, liver, and are deposited in the bones.
Along with a man-made disaster, I would also call it a psychogenic disaster. In fact, it is a blow to the future generation. This is especially true for children who have witnessed all these events. There is such a thing as psychosomatics. This is the transition of a negative mental state to somatic and physical state. There is even a proverb, all diseases stem from nerves.
Russia has long been a country with a cult of violence. Over the past 30 years, Putin has unleashed 12 wars. The number of civilian casualties it estimates in the tens or even hundreds of thousands. No international organization can provide definite figures.
I said shut up! Stop it! 1, 2...
Since Putin came to power, the level of aggression in Russia has increased many times over. He has never been punished, never stopped, and enjoys his impunity. This is how the Wagnerites, who are now called the elite of the Russian army, brutally deal with civilians.
Let's go! Hold into the hand. Oh, here we go, here we go.
It is interesting that the first commander of the PMC, Dmitry Utkin, was an avowed Nazi and had a swastika tattoo.
As for Dmitry Utkin, he is a well-known Nazi. All of his symbols and tattoos testify to his belief in these views. His call sign Vagner proves, in fact, the same thing. His intolerance of other races and people in general helped him to lead this organization.
І допомогло йому очолити саме таку організацію.
The totalitarian fear and system produces new narratives and general behavior, which is shaped by the psychopathic Führer. In order to prevent history from repeating itself and to recognize the actions of the new Führer, let's look at another experiment that demonstrates the nature of human cruelty. The Stanford prison experiment.
I'm sure that every person is a tyrant by nature, just some hide behind a mask of kindness while others openly show aggression.
In 1971, American psychologist Philip Zimbardo created an imitation of a real prison in the basement of Stanford University and recruited 24 volunteers. The doctor then divided them into prisoners and guards using a coin toss.
I instructed the guards that they had to make the prisoners feel sad, hopeless and afraid, but without any physical violence.
At the first stage of the experiment, Zimbardo split the prisoners by spreading rumors that there were informers among them. Thus, the prisoners stopped trusting each other, plunged into deep depression, and were on the verge of nervous and emotional exhaustion.
At the second stage, I informed the guards that 2 prisoners were preparing to escape.
The angry guards dealt harshly with the poor prisoners, forcing them to scrub toilets and exercise to the limit of their abilities. Feeling permissive and power, the guards turned into real sadists in just 5 days.
Despite the severe prohibitions, they started beating prisoners in blind corners, believing that no one could see them.
Zimbardo proved that everyone has their own beast inside.
Dictators are not born and do not become dictators by themselves by virtue of some internal processes. For example, if a different chancellor had been elected in 1933 than Adolf Hitler, the future of Germany would have been completely different. This is undeniable, and if in 2000s Vladimir Putin had not been elected president, but somebody from among his competitors, the course of Russia would have been completely different.
Hitler and Putin committed many crimes, but the worst was the genocide against children. Just like 80 years ago, they are taken away from their families, tortured in concentration camps, forced to become blood donors and slaves.
These children will be used for mental reforming. And besides, they are hostages. These are hostages that Russia has taken and will continue to take from all social and age categories. It will use them to maximum extent possible to hide behind them in order to blackmail with them, in order to get at agents of influence through them and people who work for the Russian world and for Putinism and for Russism in every part of the world.
На русский мир и на путинизм, и на расизм.
Reichsführer SS Himmler created the organization Lebensborn, this source of life. In Lebensborn, women gave birth to children not for themselves, but for the Führer. Later, most of these children were trained and joined the SS. Today, the Russians are pursuing a similar policy. They kidnap Ukrainian children to Russify them and use them as cannon fodder in the future.
For a child, separation from parents is the biggest catastrophe that can happen in life in general. Children who are separated from their parents are, let's say, very easy to reshape their consciousness. We had this experience in the Soviet Union. Children of the so-called enemies of the people were taken away and re-educated, but in a very cynical, rude and cruel way.
God forgive me. I hope Zelensky dies too, and Putin prospers and takes control of the whole of Ukraine. Welcome to Moscow, yes? Come on in, everyone.
However, Maria Lvova-Belova, the Russian Federation's Commissioner for Children's Rights, admits that it is very difficult to re-educate Ukrainian children.
When we brought them to the Moscow region to rest a little bit, they spoke negatively about the president, said all sorts of nasty things, sang the Ukrainian anthem, said glory to Ukraine, and so on. But a little time later, these children ended up in foster families in the Moscow region. One of the boys ended up in mine, and I can see with my own eyes how this integration began to take place.
Maria Lvova-Belova did adopt a boy from Mariupol, saying she liked him. It is as simple as that. If you like a child, take it. In fact, this speech is a public recognition of child genocide. And it was for this speech that the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Putin and Lvova Belova. We have collected enough information about the crimes of the Russian president. It will be difficult, but I really hope that Putin and all those responsible for the deportation of children will be punished. The International Criminal Court's warrant for Putin's arrest was a powerful knockout for Moscow. From now on, the Führer is grounded.
Vladimir Putin has become the fourth head of state, a current head of state, to be issued an arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court, and the first head of state to be a permanent member of the UN Security Council. This is historic, this will be written in textbooks, students will study this. This will be a practice, that is, he will not die like an ordinary simple person, he is already a criminal who is being persecuted and sought by the International Criminal Court and asked to be extradited. So I am sure that this is a trigger for the Russians as well. I am sure that they understand and realize this very well.
Before the war, more than 7.5 million children lived in Ukraine. After Russia's invasion, that number dropped by half.
Of all the children we have returned, we as a state, as of now, there are 386 children. We do not have any assistance from the Russian authorities, no. We did it on our own. How did we do it? The Russians are trying to answer these questions, among others, how do they return Ukrainian children? But we do not tell them, including publicly. We want to continue to have this toolkit. Believe me, the return of each child is like a small special operation.
Even the Russian Orthodox Church joined the child genocide. The servants of Satan are on the other side of the front. There can be no mercy for Satanists, regardless of the identity they take, a soldier, old woman or child. They are all one or the same, the creatures of hell. Do not let your hand tremble when you fire a bullet or a shell at the enemies of the Lord.
We're currently in Kherson. It is a Russian torture chamber.
The Russians not only deport and kill small Ukrainians, they also torture them, among with adults.
I can tell you about one boy, Vitaly, who is 14 years old. He was in a children's torture chamber. Twice he was brought there to watch what was happening to the adults. In front of his very eyes, an adult man, a Ukrainian, was being beaten very severely. After that, he was told that the same thing would happen to him. He was supposed to confess that he was a Ukrainian spy, and once he was taken to the firing squad when he was told so directly that if he didn't want to confess, then they would just shoot him. They took out a gun and put it to his head. Good evening.
Good evening.
Putin often mentions children in his speeches, and at such moments his face lights up with happiness.
Little sweet children. I think this is a natural feeling. I have it in my life.
At the same time, the Moscow Führer deprives Ukrainian women of the happiness of motherhood. On March 9, 2022, Putin's army dropped several bombs on the Mariupol Maternity Hospital. 17 people were injured, 3 pregnant women and 1 baby were killed. It was the invaders' revenge for the unconquered Azov.
Little sweet children.
And now listen to the reaction of citizens of Moscow to the airstrike on the Mariupol Maternity Hospital.
Of course, children died, but a lot of our people die. It's high time we ended this war. Perhaps without these strikes, we will never end it.
To restore justice, not only Putin must be punished, but also all the beneficiaries of the criminal regime. Officials, politicians, big business, security forces, the leadership of the Ministry of Defense, the Russian Orthodox Church, and all propagandists. All of them are collective Putin, who has tied Russians together with the blood of Ukrainians and turned them into accomplices in genocide.
These crimes are not subject to statutes of limitations. You have to understand that justice will come for you. The case of Slobodan Milosevic, the case of Ratko Mladic, Radovan Karadzic, who were also not brought to justice for some time because they were on the run. But in the end, everyone was there, everyone was in court.
Putin once made a sad joke.
Those who are destined to be hanged will not be drowned.
We hope that this phrase of the Russian dictator will not become prophetic, because the world's #1 terrorist will not drown and will not be hanged. The world should see him in the dock. Ukraine has already shown there is no greatness of the world's alleged second army, destroying the myth of Russia's invincibility. This war can be compared to the battle between David and Goliath, but little David's sling is not enough. He needs a much more powerful weapon.
Because if Russia doesn't lose, all the classic Nazi traits will be on display, they will be manifested in the most brutal way, and this will mean that the world is unstable, the world is constantly under attack, the world is constantly in terrorist attacks, in chaos.
The world must finally realize that now is the historic time to break the back of Putinism. And Ukrainians will definitely do it and restore historical justice.